everybody, and welcome back to the Sense and Sensibility vlog series. This vlog series is again in support of the Jane Austen Summer Program's JASP 2025 Sensibility and Domesticity, which will take place this June 19th through the 22nd in historic New Bern, North Carolina. It's going to be this great little symposium with scholars and students and teachers and people from all walks of life. You don't have to be an academic to attend. We would love to see you all there. You will have the opportunity, if you do attend, to see all three of us, meet us, maybe even ask us to be your dance partner at the Regency Ball. So we would love to see you there. We will look forward to accidentally stepping on your toes. But without further ado, I am your co-host, Sarah.
I'm your co-host, Medea.
And I'm your co-host, Maizie.
Mm-hmm. And in this episode, we will be talking about, drumroll please, romance in Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. I know that I have a lot of thoughts about the three primary suitors that we meet in Sense and Sensibility who come to sweep Eleanor and Marianne off their feet. Does anybody have any thoughts that they're just dying to get off their chest before we jump right in? Who should we start with? Where should we begin? Because this is a really loaded topic.
I feel like the natural place to start is Edward Ferrars, just because we meet him first out of the three main suitors.
May I read the passage in which he is introduced? I bookmarked it.
Please
do.
I think he's got one of the silliest introductions. It's so funny because when Austen introduced him, she's immediately like, yeah, this guy is a loser. That's our first impression of him. She goes, yeah, this guy, he's a total loser. She says, this is the beginning of chapter 3, like 1 or 2 pages in. She says, Edward Ferrars was not recommended to their good opinion by any particular graces of person or address. He was not handsome, and his manners required to make them pleasing. He was too diffident to do justice to himself, but when his natural shyness was overcome, his behavior gave every indication of an open, affectionate heart. His understanding was good, and his education had given it solid improvement. But he was neither fitted by abilities nor disposition to answer the wishes of his mother and sister, who longed to see him distinguished as, well, they hardly knew what. They wanted him to make a fine figure in the world in some manner or other. His mother wished to interest him in political concerns, to get him into Parliament, or to see him connected with some of the great men of his day. Mrs. John Dashwood wished it likewise, but in the meanwhile, till one of these superior blessings could be attained, it would have quieted her ambition to see him driving a barouche. Edward had no turn for great men or barouches. All his wishes centered in domestic comfort and the quiet of private life. Fortunately, he had a younger brother who was more promising. And I just think that this introduction is so funny because she's like, yeah, they had no reason to think he was great. He wasn't successful. He wasn't even a particularly engaging conversationalist. Once you got to know him, he was all right. But he was kind of a loser. Like, jump right into it. It reminds me a lot in Jane Eyre of how every other page, Jane is like, yeah, Mr. Rochester is so ugly. He's so ugly. He's a loser. He's lame. He's ugly. He's mean. Like, he's not fun to talk to. And yet, she falls in love with him all the same. I just think that's hilarious. So that is how we, in fact, meet Edward Ferrars. And then what happens after we meet him?
Well, his arrival sets off sort of a chain of events, and he and Eleanor just begin chatting and spending time together. And of course, Marianne's first thought is, great, I have a brother-in-law set out already. And she and Mrs. Dashwood are pretty certain he's going to propose just after a short time of knowing Eleanor. And of course, when Marianne asks Eleanor about this, I think it's hilarious. Eleanor's like, oh yes, I esteem him. I like him. Marianne's like, what? Love.
Where's your passion?
Where is your heart?
She's so mean. Like, you like him. What does that mean?
Right, exactly. I feel like Eleanor and Edward are kind of well suited in that way, that they don't really want to talk about their feelings that much. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because Edward Ferrars actually says very little in the novels. He speaks a lot more in the film and TV adaptations, and so I feel like that's where a lot of people get their kind of conception of him in this, dashing Hugh Grant or Dan Stevens in the television series. But then we kind of recall the passage that Sarah read. It was like, was that really the right casting choice?
Too dashing for sure.
He's such like a Ken character. Like, he's a guy. he's a guy. But I love that because he's just so normal in this, like, so awkward and so normal in this world of characters that are like so dramatic.
Yes.
It's so funny.
Yeah, he's a breath of fresh air. And honestly, the sort of like nothing to recommend him spiel sort of reminds me a bit of the start of Northanger Abbey, when they're like, she wasn't really cut out to be a heroine. Like, no one upon seeing her would have thought that Catherine Morland would be a heroine. So just sort of that, like, well, maybe they'll surprise us, but right now don't have a bunch of faith that they're going to turn out quite interesting.
Right. And I think that that's so funny with Marianne's, like you were saying, her description of Edward when she's talking to Eleanor and their mom. And she says, Edward is very amiable and I love him tenderly, but yet he is not the kind of young man. There is something wanting. His figure is not striking. It has none of that great grace which I should expect in the man who could seriously attach my sister. His eyes want all that spirit, that fire which at once announced virtue and intelligence. And besides all this, I am afraid, Mamma, he has no real taste. Music scarcely to attract. And though he admires Eleanor's drawings very much, it is not the admiration of a person who can understand their worth. It is evident, in spite of his frequent attention to her while she draws, that in fact he knows nothing of the matter. He admires as a lover, not as a connoisseur. And it's so just dragging him. She says this man has no taste. He doesn't like art. He doesn't like music. A real man, a real hero, a real love interest would like art and literature and music. And then she's complaining about the way he read this poem.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
And she says, I can hardly keep my seat to hear those beautiful lines which have frequently almost driven me wild, pronounced with such impenetrable calmness, such dreadful indifference. And then her mom just laughs, and it's so funny. She said, he would certainly have done more justice to simple and elegant prose. I thought so at the time, but you would give him Cowper. That's so funny. Oh my gosh, I believe this is Dashwood.
It's like she knew that he wasn't going to get this right. It was like a test that she was setting him up for failure.
Exactly.
Setting him up for failure. Like, yeah.
And
But
like,
she
maybe
was so very Mary. She's like, you have to be good enough for my sister. Like, if
right.
you can't read this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eleanor will realize how boring he is if he can't read this poem correctly. Just a take.
Yeah. And of course that backfires, and Eleanor's like, wow. He's got such his emotions. That's so hot.
Oh, yes. But then, of course, all this attention catches the eye of Mrs. John Dashwood, and then she has that quite awkward conversation with Mrs. Dashwood saying, virtually, we have other plans for Edward, so we're just going to make sure that he and Eleanor don't get together. And basically, soon after that, the Dashwoods have to leave. And then they go to Barton Cottage, home of, well, on the land of Mrs. Dashwood's cousin. And that adds a whole different dynamic, because when they go to the house and meet Mrs. Jennings, that's all she's interested in it's matchmaking and love and figuring out the secret bows, of course, of Eleanor and Marianne.
But that brings us to the introduction of Colonel Brandon, who we meet when the ladies move to Barton Cottage. And Colonel Brandon's introduction is maybe not quite so unflattering as Edward's, but it's really, really lukewarm. So we have Colonel Brandon, the friend of Sir John, seemed no more adapted by resemblance of manner to be his friend than Lady Middleton was to be his wife, or Mrs. Jennings to be Lady Middleton's mother. He was silent and grave. His appearance, however, was not unpleasing, in spite of his being, in the opinion of Marianne and Margaret, an absolute old bachelor, for he was on the wrong side of 35. But though his face was not handsome, his countenance was sensible. Dress was particularly gentlemanlike. So once again, we've got Austen really poking fun at one of her leading men. She says, he wasn't unhandsome, but he was old. This man was an old dog. He was ancient, practically on his deathbed.
The whole 35.
And Marianne just takes it from the start that she does not like Colonel Brandon. He's boring. He's old. He may appreciate her music, but she doesn't really care because he's boring and old. Now, very, very drastically different than the first two men Austen introduces us to. The meeting of Willoughby and Marianne. Very cinematic.
It is so cinematic. It is so gothic. It is,
yes.
It is perfect gothic romance meeting. So we've got Marianne and Margaret, and they're out taking this long walk in this, this green field across the moor, if you will. And suddenly it starts pouring rain. And so Marianne and Margaret are like, oh, what great fun, we're gonna run home. And then Marianne falls. She trips and falls and is like, I need help. I'm a maiden in distress. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, a gentleman carrying a gun with 2 pointers playing round him was passing up the hill and within a few yards of Marianne when her accident happened. He put down his gun and ran to her assistance. She had raised herself from the ground, but her foot had been twisted in the fall, and she was scarcely able to stand. The gentleman offered his services, and perceiving that her modesty declined what her situation rendered necessary, took her up in his arms without further delay and carried her down the hill. So we got this really, really handsome, charming guy who swoops in, picks Marianne up off the ground, carries her bridal style the whole way back to her house, and puts her down on a chair in their living room. And he's so mysterious and tall and handsome and dashing, and you just fall immediately right in love with him. And then to make matters even more romantic, he says, no, I'm not going to sit down, but I'm going to come back tomorrow. And then he whisks himself away in the rain. And you're like, who is this mysterious stranger?
Yeah, I love the emphasis on mystery in his introduction. It's like, who is he? Like, he comes in and he saves the day, but like, who, like, we don't learn his name yet. Who is this man? Who is this handsome man?
It's so similar, I think, in some ways to, again, Jane Eyre in Jane's first meeting with Mr. Rochester when they're on the road and he gallops by like a demon on his horse and all of that, and they meet and he's thrown from his horse and it's just this random meeting, in dismal weather, and you're like, who is this man?
The weather really does it too. Like, something about the rain that's like automatically romantic. Like, someone's saving you, and it's like pouring. It's like, come on. Like, obviously she's gonna fall in love with him. Right. How could she not?
You're kind of left wondering, was he a phantom?
Mm-hmm. But it feels too like, it's so like, it feels like Marianne's perspective. Like, this introduction of him, it's like, he's so handsome and he's such a gentleman. He just carried her home. Like, it feels like it's so tinged with her like sensibility, and like Mrs. Dashwood's also like her sensibility too. And I think that's, oh my god, it's so fun. I love it. I love his introduction.
He does come back. He makes good on his word. He comes back. He starts coming back like every day. And Marianne and Mr. Willoughby form an attachment. They are always together. They're always seen whispering. And I think it's really fun because we primarily see their attachment through the eyes of others. We see it through the eyes of Eleanor, through the eyes of their mother, Mrs. Dashwood. And I think that's great. We don't get a lot of it firsthand from Marianne, but we can see even through others' perceptions of their interactions how in love they are, because they are in love. They're very in love. One of my this is such a small little scene, but one of my favorite things is they're all playing a card game, and it says that Willoughby, anytime they were playing cards, would cheat at cards, cheat his own hand and cheat everybody else's hand to give Marianne a good hand to make sure that she would win at cards. And I'm like, oh my god, like that's so cute. And then we have this scene where Willoughby asks for a lock of Marianne's hair, and it's so like that's so crazy romantic. It's like literally it's described as he's begging something of her. And I think this is a big reason that I love the 2008 Sense and Sensibility miniseries adaptation so much, because I really do think that it shows how truly in love Willoughby was with Marianne before everything happened. I think it does a really good job of not downplaying the way that he really, not even like led her on, the way he really fell in love with her and then made the decision to leave her anyway. You can just tell they're both very, 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 very in love with each other. Like, they really were. They had something. And then he threw it all away.
I completely agree with you. You're really summing up all of the emotions here. And also, too, the fact that they had all of these things in common. Their taste in music, their taste in poetry, their taste in literature. Even just like general thoughts about seasons and personality and character. Like, everything lined up. So it really seemed like it was the perfect match, basically.
Yeah, like very meant to be. Which I think just makes it even like more tragic that like that didn't like work out like that, because it's like they were so like they could have been like so perfect, and they were so perfect while they were, and then they weren't.
That sort of brings us to the day of great import, where it seems like there might be a proposal because he requests a private audience with Marianne, and it doesn't go as planned by a long shot. And he rushes out. Marianne left in tears. Eleanor's sort of left as Mrs. Dashwood gets upset too. She's just sort of like, we don't have any information. Then they learn he's been called to town on business. And even though Mrs. Dashwood asks him to come back and visit, he's like, no, that can't happen. And so we're also left with this added layer of mystery. So we have the Colonel Brandon's letter. He was called away. Now Willoughby's being called away to town. So we have sort of like two London-connected mysteries going on. Yeah, it really shocked me the first time that I read it. I was very surprised that it took such a terribly melancholy turn. I was like, wow, not expecting this at all.
And we've got another layer of mystery too, bringing Edward back into the plot, because finally, way later than anybody thought he would, he finally comes to visit Barton Cottage. And everyone's like, why did you take so long? Like, why didn't you come visit us? And Edward is just in a terrible, terrible mood. He's sullen. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's unpleasant. He's serious. He's frowning all the time. And everybody is like, what has caused this change in disposition? He's hardly looking at Eleanor when they had this epic connection earlier. Like, what is going on? And, you know, he stays for maybe a week or two. I don't remember exactly how long, but over the course of his stay, he gets a little bit more animated, but still you can tell he's out of spirits. And by the end of his visit, you still don't know what's wrong. You don't know what was bugging him. It's weird.
Yeah. And then there's the hair ring.
Hair.
Which Marianne's like, oh, that looks like your hair, Eleanor. And Eleanor's like, it does look like my hair. But he never asked for it. I never gave it to him. Could it be Fanny's hair? They ask Mrs. John Dashwood. And he's like, oh, yes, the lighting casts a different shade on it, which is very suspicious.
And for a moment, Eleanor is like, what if he like took it from my head while I wasn't looking, LOL. And she's like, that would be kind of cute. And then she's like, wait a minute, girl, you're so delusional, which I thought was hilarious.
It's like, back to reason. That's not possible. Get back to sense. So in London,
Yes.
that's sort of the next place in setting, and a lot of things happen. So Mrs. Jennings goes to London. Wait, I'm skipping over the Steeles. The Steeles are quite important. The Steeles first come to Barton Park, some relation of Mrs. Jennings, and they're very annoying. They're very, very annoying and vulgar. And there's Anne, who's just the talkative. Yes, we won't talk about Anne.
About her bows.
Oh, yes.
She has so
ridiculous. And then Lucy, who she's trying very hard to sort of buddy up with the Dashwood sisters. Marianne's not having any of it. She just does not engage with the Steeles, but Eleanor feels kind of obligated. And then Lucy learns that they are well acquainted with Edward Ferrars. That piques her interest.
It piques her interest, especially because everybody keeps saying, oh, Edward and Eleanor, they have a little something.
And eventually we have sort of one evening when they all are at dinner, and Lucy and Eleanor are going for sort of a walk around, and Lucy asks if she can divulge a secret. And I also didn't see this coming upon my first read. I was like, wow, Austen is really playing with the hearts of her readers. And we learn that Lucy and Edward have been engaged for these 4 years.
Hold the phone.
And it's like everything stops. If I was Eleanor, I'm not exactly sure, but I don't think I could have kept it together. Eleanor, it's all propriety, all good sense, all... She's like, wait, Edward Ferrars? Well, she has to clarify. Are we talking about the same person? But she keeps it together. And then it's only after that conversation has passed that Austen sort of lets us into her head. And all the thoughts and feelings start rolling around. But, yeah.
Yeah, she's better than me, because I would have definitely not been as calm. I'm like, what do you mean 4 years? Like, I've known him during these 4 years, and I've never heard, like, why have you, like, kept this from me? Oh my gosh, I'd feel so, like, betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have shown that I would have been very Marianne, and that, like, I probably would have caused a scene, honestly. I don't know. She didn't. I'm like, she's so brave, because, oh my God.
Yeah, and she thinks about it very, very logically. She goes through every scenario in her head. She even doubts that Lucy's telling the truth for a very long time, until Lucy shows her the letters that Edward has sent her over their engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally she concludes that, based on Edward's initial treatment of her, his initial behavior toward her while they were still at Norland, he did feel something for her, and Edward really did harbor an affection for her. She ends up concluding that, Lucy Steele is tasteless and really uneducated, illiterate, not a good conversationalist. Edward's never going to be happy with her, but he's made this promise and he's going to honor it. And she realizes he knows that they're not a good match, but he has
too much honor. And
exactly.
So that's when Austen sort of reveals a bit more of his virtues. It's like, okay, there's a bit more to Edward. He's still boring. He's not that great looking.
He's still awkward.
But he keeps his word at the very least.
He's loyal.
He is loyal. He's loyal to his lady. So then we go to London. And that's when things start going down. Because finally we get Colonel Brandon, and he reappears, and honestly nobody cares except for Eleanor, because they're so we can kind of just brush over that. But then Willoughby reappears at a party, and it's not very pretty.
It's always at a party. It's always at a...
At last he turned around again and regarded them both. She started up, and pronouncing his name in a tone of affection, held out her hand to him. He approached, and addressing himself rather to Eleanor than Marianne, as if wishing to avoid her eye, and determined not to observe her attitude, inquired in a hurried manner after Mrs. Dashwood, and asked how long they had been in town. And then, some blah, blah, blah. They have a moment, and then Marianne, her face was crimsoned over, and she exclaimed in a voice of the greatest emotion, "Good God, Willoughby, what is the meaning of this? Have you not received my letters? Will you not shake hands with me?" And she is just making a huge scene in the middle of this ballroom.
Yeah, that feels like that's the reaction I would have. I'm like, I used to think I was like an Eleanor because I'm like oldest daughter. I like to think that I'm like put together. I'm like, no, like when I like feel an emotion, it like explodes. I'd be like, what do you mean you're not going to talk to me? Like we're at this part, you're going to ignore me. I would like throw a fit. So I feel her in this moment because it feels like it's like such a betrayal. Like you're not even like at least going to do me the decency of like speaking to me.
Right. No explanation. She's been
Mhm.
sending all of these letters, nothing in reply, and then suddenly he's here talking to someone else, and then he doesn't even speak to her.
And then he talks to her sister and doesn't even look at. I'm like, oh, that would
Yeah.
make me so angry.
Like she's not even there.
Yeah, like she's just totally invisible.
And then Marianne comes home. She's crying. She's distraught. Eleanor's trying to comfort her, but Marianne refuses to be consoled, and she writes Willoughby one more letter. And she's writing fast. She's writing through her tears. And finally, the next day, she gets a response. And can you believe the audacity? "My dear Madame, I have just had the honor of receiving your letter, for which I beg to return my sincere acknowledgments. I am much concerned to find there was anything in my behavior last night which did not meet your approbation. And though I am quite at a loss to discover in what point I could be so unfortunate as to offend you, I entreat your forgiveness of what I can assure you to have been perfectly unintentional. I shall never reflect on my former acquaintance with your family in Devonshire without the most grateful pleasure, and flatter myself it will not be broken by any mistake or misapprehension of my actions. My esteem for your whole family is very sincere, but if I have been so unfortunate as to give rise to a belief of more than I felt or meant to express, I shall reproach myself for not having been more guarded in my professions of that esteem. That I should ever have meant more, you will allow to be impossible, when you understand that my affections have been long engaged elsewhere, and it will not be many weeks, I believe, before this engagement is fulfilled. It is with great regret that I obey your commands of returning the letters with which I have been honored from you, and the lock of your hair, which you so obligingly bestowed on me. I am, dear Madame, your most obedient, humble servant, John Willoughby." Moment of silence.
Even Eleanor can't believe it. Like, Marianne reads it. She's just beside herself. She has Eleanor read it. And even Eleanor, this is sort of the first time we actually get an outburst from her. Like, not even when she learned that Edward was engaged did she kind of speak out in anger. But here, in this room with Marianne reading this letter, seeing this injustice and falsehood, even she can't help but get upset, and rightly so.
Yeah. Which I think is really sweet too, that like this like big kind of emotional moment for Eleanor comes on like behalf of her sister. I think that's really sweet. Like not even for her, because like something similar it just happened to her, but like she's like being logical about, but then like her sister is being wrong, and she's like absolutely not. Like this is, and I think that's because they're like the heart of the novel. So I think that's really sweet that's what brings out the emotion in her.
And everybody up until now had assumed that Marianne and Willoughby were engaged because of their behavior toward each other at Barton. So this is when it comes out, and Marianne says, no, we were never actually engaged, but he gave me every sign, the way he acted, what he said to me. No, he never said explicitly he was in love with me, but every action, every word, it was an assurance of his affection. And I think that is part of what's so tender and touching about Marianne and Willoughby's love story and then heartbreak story. And I think it's the worst part is the fact that he's pretending like he never acted like he liked her. He's pretending like he didn't lead her on. It's the denial that makes it so heartbreaking. Not the rejection. It's the fact that he's not willing to admit that there was ever anything there.
Yeah.
And that's what makes their story so heartbreaking, because you just feel for Marianne so much in that moment, because everybody knows what it's like to be a teenager and be just have your heart completely ripped to shreds and stomped on by somebody who is so self-absorbed that they're not even willing to say, hey, I did act like I liked you. I did like you. However, I made the choice to be with somebody else and not pick you for this reason.
Yeah, it feels so like it's so like YouTuber apology. He's like, yeah, like I never did that, but like sorry you feel bad. I'm like,
No,
oh my God.
I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you took it like that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Oh my gosh. It's devastating. It's devastating.
And I think it's also so realistic to see that Marianne continues to defend him throughout the whole thing. She's like, there must be some reason. Like, you know, like, yes, his actions are inexcusable, but there must be some reason. I think something that's really challenging about Sense and Sensibility as a novel is that Austen is asking us to abandon our notions of romance and to abandon our notions of what makes for an epic love story, because we've got this epic love story between Willoughby and Marianne. And in this epic love story, you know, he saves her from her her twisted ankle, and they have this really quick love story. They fall in love so quickly. They're so compatible. They can't see anybody else in the room but each other. And then they don't work out. And he doesn't come, you know, after he breaks her heart, he doesn't come rushing back to say, I'm so sorry. I loved you all along. Please take me back. Instead, Austen is championing the boring, unconventional love interests, Edward and Colonel Brandon, and she's asking us to root for them and be on their side. She's asking us to root for the guys that aren't as handsome, that aren't as charming, that aren't as fun and witty and quick in conversation. And I think that that's something that she was doing that was maybe really different at the time, because you really think of, you know, Regency and Victorian literature as being like that is romanticism. That's when we're wanting Mr. Rochester and, you know, Heathcliff, and we want the dashing, brooding heroes that love poetry and art and music and, you know, are just so charming and handsome. But Austen is saying, no, you need to pick the sensible man. You need to pick the man who is solid and stable and maybe not super cute, but who will, you know, not run off with somebody else and leave you heartbroken. And I think that that's maybe something that's really hard to wrap your mind around when you're reading Sense and Sensibility the first time.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I haven't really considered that myself. So it's really interesting to think about. And for now, I have to run to class, so I'll let Sarah and Nadea finish the conversation, and I will see you next week.
Bye, Maizie.
Bye, Maizie.
All right, and now that it's just the two of us, I think we might speed run a little bit through the last bits of the novel. But, you know, basically, a lot of the novel, I think it's interesting too, because the love interests actually don't have a lot of page time. They're not in the novel a lot. A lot of it is our heroines, Eleanor and Marianne, talking about and thinking about the love interests. So now we've got Marianne, who's just heartbroken. She's inconsolable. Nothing is good, nothing is right, and it's all terrible. Everything is terrible. And Eleanor is trying to console her while also being in the midst of her own heartbreak over Edward that she can't tell anybody about, because Lucy has told her about their secret engagement in confidence, and Eleanor's not willing to break that confidence. So Eleanor's just like dying in a corner, nobody to talk to. you know, like nursing her hot chocolate, trying not to cry, but being strong for everybody else's sake.
Yeah. Which feels very like Edward of her too, I think, because his whole like he kept his word to Lucy, and that's why he's miserable. And she's also keeping her like word to Lucy, and it's making her miserable. So I'm like, they're such a perfect little match.
They're meant to be soulmate material. Then we get new information. Colonel Brandon shows up and he's like, Eleanor, look, I gotta tell you the truth. So you remember that mysterious letter that I got that called me out to town that day that we were supposed to all hang out together and like have a picnic? Well, let me spill the tea because I got this ward. I fell in love with this girl a really long time ago. She ended up marrying my brother. It was super tragic. And then I went off and, you know, did my duty as a soldier. And then I came back and I found her and they had gotten divorced and she was living at this poor house, dying of consumption. And she had this daughter that was like 3. And she, you know, said, will you accept my daughter as your ward? And so I agreed to take care of her daughter for her. So I've got this daughter. She's like 14, maybe 15 right now. And a few months ago, she disappeared from the lady that she was supposed to be staying with. She disappeared. I haven't heard anything from her until I got this letter. And this letter told me her whereabouts. So I went to go find my ward. I get there, she's pregnant. And the dad has abandoned her, left her. You know, she's by herself, destitute, with child, about to have a kid. And guess who the daddy was? Guess who?
You'll never guess.
You'll never guess.
Oh,
it's Mr. John Willoughby. He did it.
He's real good at sleeping around, isn't he?
He seduced her, got her pregnant, and said, you know, oh, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna come back, I swear. He did not come back. She never heard heads or tails from him after that. And so, you know, Eleanor is taking this news and she's like, whoa, what? And then she's kind of like, yeah, I always had suspicions about him. I always thought his intentions were a little bit sketchy. Like, it's not good. And so then she tells Marianne, and this is when Marianne finally kind of relinquishes some of that hope that she was still holding on to about Willoughby. And finally, this is making her see, you know, yeah, he did act like he liked me, and yeah, he probably did, but he's also not a good guy. And yes, he broke my heart, but at least he didn't get me pregnant and then leave me, which, you know, inarguably is worse. Like, he did not leave me destitute with a child out of wedlock in, you know, Georgian Regency England, where that was so frowned upon, could ruin a woman's entire reputation. Just crazy. So yeah, so we've got that whole moment. We have a really, really fun scene where Eleanor and Lucy are hanging out, and then Edward bursts into the room. So that's super cool. And by cool, I mean horrifically awkward for everybody involved. It's so funny because Lucy is just talking about how, oh, we met Mrs. Ferrars, Edward's mom, who is supposedly gonna set him up with somebody else who they think is more suitable for him, who has more money and a better status. She's like, oh, like, I think she liked me. I really think she liked me. She had no reason to like me, but she was so nice to me. She was so civil. And Eleanor's like, girl, you're a little bit delusional, like, girl, get real. And then Eleanor was prevented from making any reply to this civil triumph by the doors being thrown open, the servants announcing Mr. Ferrars, and Edwards immediately walking in. It was a very awkward moment, and the countenance of each showed that it was so. They all looked exceedingly foolish, and Edward seemed to have as great an inclination to walk out of the room again as to advance farther into it, which I think is so funny. They do such a great job in the Ainley 1995 adaptation, showing this scene where Edward walks in and he's like, Eleanor, like, I just gotta tell you, and then he sees Lucy and he's like, deer in the headlights. It's so funny and so awkward and so painful. yeah, it's like none of them are talking. And so Eleanor starts very awkwardly offering up all of this information about her family and her sister, and she's just awkwardly yapping and yapping and yapping because nobody else is saying anything, and it's so painful, and you're reading it and you're like, mm, like skip, skip, skip. So
Yeah,
then
you
finally,
can really feel the secondhand embarrassment there.
it's full. It's bad. It's really bad. And then finally, finally, Eleanor's like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna give them a moment of privacy. I'm gonna make up this excuse and act like I'm gonna go find Marianne, and so I'm gonna leave. So then she kind of like lingers on the staircase, listening to hear what they're gonna say, and then she really does go fetch Marianne. And then Marianne comes in, and being Marianne is like, "Oh my gosh, Edward, we've missed you so much. Don't you just love? Aren't you so excited to see Eleanor? Aren't you? Isn't it great? Haven't you missed her?" And Eleanor's like, oh my God. And you, as the reader, who is privy to the information that Eleanor, or not Eleanor, that Lucy and Edward are engaged, unlike Marianne, who knows nothing. And you're like, oh my God, like, shut up, stop talking, girl. You're making this so much worse for everybody involved. This is so embarrassing. Stop talking. Everybody's so uncomfortable. And I really do think that this scene is the perfect I think the scene is like just the perfect culmination of Edward and Eleanor's whole romantic arc, because their relationship is just so awkward and stilted. And once again, it's so weird and kind of unsettling that Austen is asking us to root for this really awkward, less fate driven relationship, rather than the one between Willoughby and Marianne. I think one of the biggest highlights is Mr. Willoughby showing up drunk, dialing his ex in the 19th century at Eleanor and Marianne's house, and he wants to talk to Eleanor. And, well, he wants to talk to Marianne, but he talks to Eleanor. And he's like, girl, I gotta tell you, I loved your sister. I really did. And I was a cad. And this is my reasoning for everything. And it's why it happened. And, I was a cad. I'm so sorry. And it happened. And I'm going to be miserable forever. But I loved your sister. Please, I hope that she forgives me. Like, he's just falling all over himself. And it really is, the equivalent of drunk dialing your ex.
I feel like also it feels very gratifying for like Marianne, because it's like actually she wasn't totally delusional this whole time. Like this guy was into her, and now he's like coming clean about it. I'm like, like it feels very gratifying and satisfying that like finally she's like validated and like having these feelings and having believed them to be reciprocated. Like she's not just crazy.
Yeah,
it's also fun. Like he drunk dials her in real life. That's great.
Yeah, and it's really sad, but you're right. It's like you feel vindicated.
Mhm.
And Eleanor asked, like, why did you call? Like, why? Like, you could have sent, she literally said, you could have sent a letter. She says a note would have answered every purpose. Why was it necessary to call? Like, why did you come here? And he says, it was necessary to my own pride. I could not bear to leave the country in a manner that might lead you or the rest of the neighborhood to suspect any part of what had really passed between Miss Smith and myself. The sight of your dear sister, however, was really dreadful, and to heighten the matter, I found her alone. You were all gone. I do not know where. And so just talking about how, he felt like he had to treat Marianne so abysmally, talking about how he had literally like stalked them across London and been like watching them, and he had always ducked into shops when he saw them coming so that he could avoid them. And you're like, oh, you're so silly. You're so silly. And
What a
then
fool.
Eleanor admits that she read all of the letters, and it was so she said, I saw every note that passed. And Willoughby says, when the first of hers reached me, as it immediately did, for I was in town the whole time, what I felt is, in the common phrase, not to be expressed, in a more simple one, perhaps too simple to raise any emotion, my feelings were very, very painful. Every line, every word was, in the hackneyed metaphor, which their dear writer, were she here, would forbid, a dagger to my heart. Marianne and Willoughby are so similar. They talk the same. They use the same expressions. He knows that she would laugh at him for using such cliches. But, you know, he says, it was a dagger to my heart. It was so painful. You know, he sounds like Marianne talking about him, which is really, really sad. But, you know, it's over. He's married to somebody else, and that's the reality of the situation. And Eleanor says, you know, you're not paying any compliments to Marianne or to your wife right now. You need to leave. And that's kind of the last that we hear from Willoughby until the very end, after Marianne has already married Colonel Brandon. It's really nice in the end, like the last couple of pages, where we hear that Willoughby, you know, he doesn't stay miserable for the rest of his life. He's rich. He's got a wife. Sometimes he likes her. It's fine. You know, he wasn't dying. But so even though he moves on and he lives a fine life and, you know, he's content, he still holds on to that idea of Marianne as his ideal woman. He never quite gets over her. No other woman compares to Marianne. But Marianne is off happy with her husband, and she doesn't think much more of him. And he has to live with the fact that he loved her and he chose to leave her. And I think that
it feels very I Bet You Think About Me by Taylor Swift.
Yes,
like it's like yeah, you are thinking about me. Like everyone you meet, you're thinking about me.
In your house with your organic shoes and your $1 million,
yeah.
You know. After Edward's mom disowns him and settles her estate onto his younger brother Robert, Lucy breaks up with him and immediately marries Robert. And then Colonel Brandon offers Edward the parish on his estate so that he can like be like go into the ministry and go like pursue the church as a career. And so then Edward shows up, and all the Dashwoods have heard is that Lucy is now Mrs. Ferrer, so they assume that she's married Edward. But he shows up, and they're like, "How's your wife?" And he's like, "What are you talking about? Literally, like, what do you mean, my wife? What?" And he's like, "Oh, like no, like she married my brother. She dumped me. I was too poor for her." And then they like Edward and Eleanor get together, but in the book we don't see it, so we only see what happens in the movies. In the show, my heart has always been and will always be yours.
I kind of love that, like, that we don't get to see it. Like in the book, it's like their private thing. Like they get to keep that for themselves. It's not like a spectacle. It feels very true to them. It's like when it's like them getting married at the courthouse vibe. Like we don't know what's going on. Very like private wedding feel. Like we know that they're together and happy, private but not secret. Love it.
Mm-hmm. It's adorable. It's sweet. So what's overall final opinions of the three suitors? Brandon, Marianne was right in her initial opinion. He's too old. I mean, like, he's sweet and he would be
He's
great
very sweet.
Like 25. It's just not great for a heroine who's 16, in my opinion. And I'm sure that maybe some of you.
It also feels kind of like he's like a lesson that she has to learn. Like she has to grow to like him. And it feels like it's like, oh, look, you've been too sensible. Now you must marry this like sense guy, like sensible, but in the other way guy. So it doesn't feel like it always has felt to me a little bit forced. Like they're like happy and I'm like good for them. But also I'm like, I don't know. It's like versus like Eleanor and Edward get like what they both want. Like they both wanted to be together this whole time. So they get it's like they're rewarded for their sense versus Marianne doesn't feel like she's necessarily awarded for like her sensibility.
Yeah, it's like she's settling for the guy who's liked her this entire time, who she never had an interest in. And frankly, that's just unrealistic. Like it reminds me so much of Pretty in Pink, which is my favorite. I love Pretty in Pink so much. And in the initial ending for Pretty in Pink, Andy was going to end up with Ducky, who has been in love with her this whole movie, who she has never been interested in. The whole time she's been interested in Blaine. And yeah, he's kind of a wet sock. He has no spine. He doesn't stand up for himself. But like at the end of the movie, you're not rooting for her to end up with Ducky, who has been like blatantly disregarding her expressed lack of interest in him. She's like, Ducky, I don't like you. I'm not gonna like you. He's just ignoring that and continuing to pursue her and making her uncomfortable and saying like really inappropriate things to her. And so you're like, of course you want her to end up with Blaine, who she's liked through the whole movie, even if he's kind of a loser. But like, he's so cute and he's Andrew McCarthy, so like, you know. But I digress. All right, that has been our recap of romance, our review of the Suitors in Sense and Sensibility. Clearly, I am Team Willoughby until he's trash, but you know, whatever. It's fine. Austen's asking us to not be Team Willoughby, which I guess I can do because I love you, Jane. But you know, I'm Team what Willoughby could have been. Um, so those are my thoughts on the matter. If you're interested in hearing more, because I always have more to say, you should definitely register for JASP and hit me up while you're there. You can talk to us more about our thoughts and feelings at JASP 2025, June 19th through the 22nd in historic New Bern, North Carolina. We'll look forward to seeing you there. Until then, I have been Sarah.
And I've been Nadea.
And Maisie already said goodbye. So we will see you next week for another episode of the Sense and Sensibility vlog series right here on the Jane Austen Summer Program YouTube channel. Bye.
Bye.